a millionaire CEO invited his shy maid to a high-society golf championship, expecting silence. But when she stunned the elite crowd, he fell harder than anyone imagined. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The bustling heart of Westbridge City pulsed with the hum of high-end cars and executive chatter, none of which mattered to the quiet maid who dusted the polished floors of the Lansing estate each morning before dawn. Her name was Maribel Aldana, a reserved woman whose warm smile and kind nature often went unnoticed by the mansion's inhabitants, especially by her boss, the powerful young CEO, Rory Lansing. Rory, the heir to the Lansing Corporation fortune, had grown up in privilege so lavish it seemed to have robbed him of simple joys. From the outside, he looked every bit the successful businessman, tall, poised, and exuding that quiet confidence that accompanied his trust fund. But behind the designer suits and the elegant facade was a young man battling the weight of impossible expectations. The board of directors and shareholders demanded ever-growing profits. The press clamored for stories of his romantic conquests, and the social elite of Westbridge gossiped about his every move, always ready to rip apart any perceived misstep. Amid this swirl of luxury and pressure, Maribel lived at the edges of his world, quietly managing her daily routine without fanfare. She rose at 4 a.m, brewed her coffee in the servants' quarters, and started work by 5, ensuring the Lansing mansion glistened by the time Rory swept downstairs for his morning run. He rarely acknowledged her beyond a polite nod, even though she had been hired 6 months ago to replace his previous housekeeper. Rory's estate manager had chosen Maribel for her impeccable references and mild temperament. No one had bothered to ask if she might hold talents beyond her domestic duties. It was not that Rory wanted to be cold. He simply had no idea how to be anything else. Raised by parents who believed in achievements and appearances over warmth and affection, he had mastered the art of polite indifference by age 10. Golf, though, that was his escape. He had discovered the sport as a boy, falling in love with its discipline and precision. A few months earlier, the Westbridge Golf Club had extended a coveted invitation to him to participate in their upcoming prestigious championship. Winning or even ranking high in such a competition would reinforce his name among the city's elite. In truth, golf served as the one place in Rory's life where he didn't feel the piercing stare of public scrutiny. On the fairway, it was just him, the club, and the hush of expectation whenever he prepared to swing. Or so he hoped. But this year's championship came with a twist. Rumor had it that investors and powerful CEOs from around the globe would attend, transforming the ordinarily formal setting into a veritable runway of socialites, wives, and girlfriends. Every competitor was expected to bring someone special, a partner or escort, if for no other reason than to present the image of a settled, respectable figure. The Lansing Corporation's board insisted that Rory appear in public with an elegant companion. A proper date, they claimed, would make him seem more human, less intimidating. But Rory had no one. His relationships were short-lived flings, gleaned from networking dinners or black-tie galas, each more superficial than the last. As the date of the tournament crept closer, his personal assistant hounded him daily about finalizing an invitation for a suitable companion, worried that failing to produce a partner would signal social ineptitude to the entire Westbridge circle. Rory didn't want to deal with the emotional dance of courting a woman strictly for show. The more everyone pushed, the more he resisted. One windy afternoon, after a frustrating practice session on the private green behind his mansion, Rory stormed into the house in a foul mood. He had doubled his hours to perfect each swing, but pressure seeped into his mind. No matter how much he wanted to ignore it, the board's demands ate at him. He was lost in thought, about to shed his jacket and toss it on the nearest chair, when he heard a series of gentle hums drifting from the living room. Carefully, he poked his head around the corner and found Maribel, kneeling on the polished floor, wiping the base of an ornate sculpture. She seemed almost serene, softly humming a tune under her breath. The melody wove itself into the air, calm and reassuring in a way that momentarily eased the tension in his chest. Caught off guard by an uncharacteristic curiosity, Rory cleared his throat. Maribel turned, eyes wide. She had never expected the boss to stand there, watching her so closely. She apologized profusely, saying she would keep quiet if the humming bothered him. To her surprise, Rory shook his head. "No," he murmured. "I don't mind." It was the first full sentence he had spoken to her in weeks. He stared a moment longer, then left, his mind oddly comforted by that gentle hush of music. From that day on, Maribel noticed small changes. While he seldom asked about her life, Rory's glances lingered just a second longer whenever he passed. He seemed more aware of her presence, though remained as guarded as ever. Their exchanges were brief, maybe a polite good morning or everything fine at home. But for Maribel, these were treasured glimpses into a side of the CEO she doubted anyone else had ever witnessed. A week before the tournament, the tension soared. Rory had locked himself in his study, ignoring phone calls, refusing to confirm any date for the event. The board threatened to send an actress or a model if he didn't produce someone soon. Feeling cornered, and with the dread of a lavish public spectacle, he considered skipping the event altogether. But failing to appear would spark a different crisis. Everyone would wonder if the Lansing Corporation was under financial strain, or if Rory was too weak to handle public scrutiny. In the midst of that internal turmoil, a memory flickered. That sweet, comforting melody echoing from his living room. He thought of Maribel's serene expression, her unwavering composure. An outlandish idea struck him, so absurd he almost laughed. What if he invited Maribel? It sounded ludicrous. She was his maid, after all. Hardly the typical glamorous date the society pages would expect. But then again, that was the point. He wanted no drama, no show, no illusions. If she said yes, perhaps she'd provide an honest presence at his side. At minimum, he could rely on her discretion. She had never been anything but discreet since stepping foot in his home. Impulsively, Rory pressed the intercom button, summoning Maribel to his study. When she walked in, he found it challenging to maintain eye contact. She looked so small and unassuming in that neatly pressed uniform and modest shoes. She deserved better, he thought, suddenly ashamed of the power imbalance. But he had come too far to turn back. "Have you heard of the Westbridge Championship?" he asked, forcing his usual cool tone, trying to sound casual about something that was absolutely, completely not casual. Maribel nodded politely, explaining that she'd seen the event advertised on television. Golf, she mentioned, was something her father loved. He had been a caddy at a local club before he passed. Her knowledge, and the faint nostalgia that washed over her face, startled Rory. Maybe she understood more than he realized. He took a careful breath. "I need a companion for the event," he said, voice faltering. "I would appreciate if you'd consider going with me." Maribel blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. The words tumbled out of him in a rush, stumbling over details he'd never had to explain before. He told her about the board's demands, his distaste for media illusions. She listened, her posture betraying no immediate reaction. Part of her was stunned. Why invite her, of all people, to a place filled with the city's wealthiest elite? Without wanting to pressure her, he concluded simply, "I'll understand if you say no. I know this is unorthodox." The hush that followed felt deafening. For a moment she stared at the floor, considering the weight of such a proposition. Then, an image flickered in her mind. Her father, joyfully recounting the swirl of wind on a golf course, the pride he once felt polishing clubs for rich men who barely noticed him. She could almost hear him say, "Everyone deserves a chance to be seen." So, in a voice soft but resolute, Maribel accepted. Rory nodded, relief and nervousness flooding him in equal measure. He pressed a sealed envelope into her hand, covering expenses for a suitable outfit, and anything else she might need. Their gazes locked with a hint of curiosity, each wondering what this unconventional arrangement would unleash. Neither suspected how drastically this single choice would spin their worlds around, or how the upcoming championship would become a crucible for deep truths, simmering hearts, and the unveiling of talents no one expected from a quiet maid with calloused hands and a humble spirit. The moment Maribel closed the door of Rory's study behind her, she felt every inch of her skin prickle with second thoughts. She clutched the sealed envelope, aware it held enough funds to buy a gown she could never otherwise afford. But what truly made her heart pound was the gravity of what she had agreed to do. She was a maid, an unknown figure in the eyes of the city's elite. How would they treat her, standing beside a figure as influential as Rory Lansing? Down in the servants' quarters, a modest cluster of small rooms and a shared living space, Maribel sank onto the edge of her narrow cot. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside were crisp bills and a short note in Rory's neat handwriting. "For your attire and anything else you require. R." That simple R felt oddly personal, as if he'd allowed a glimpse behind his polished exterior. Yet everything about this situation, this invitation, bordered on surreal. She gently folded the note back into the envelope and pressed it against her chest. For an instant, she imagined the swirling green of a golf course, the hush of a crowd as players lined up their shots, and her father's voice describing how a single swing could hold hope, anxiety, and triumph all at once. He had always said that golf was a dance of self-control, less about raw strength and more about understanding the wind, the terrain, your own heartbeat. She wondered if Rory felt that same sense of calm out on the fairway, or if the championship was nothing but pressure. Morning came too soon. She gathered her courage and stepped into the bustling Westbridge shopping district, an area she had visited only in passing, eyes drawn to shimmering window displays she never dreamt of entering. This time, she had a purpose. Although her posture was uncertain, the envelope tucked safely in her handbag made her footsteps a little braver. She slipped into a boutique known for understated elegance, hoping to find something refined enough to fit into Rory's world, but still comfortable enough that she would not feel like a fraud. Inside, a shop assistant floated over, all polite smiles until she spotted Maribel's simple attire and second-guessed her worth as a customer. But the assistant's attitude changed rapidly the moment Maribel revealed she was shopping for the Westbridge Championship. This was no mere window shopping. Within minutes, the woman whisked her into a private fitting area, showing her a range of gowns in soft, muted hues that whispered of sophistication. Though far from flamboyant, each dress bore a level of detail Maribel's untrained eye had never encountered up close. Intricate embroidery, delicate lace trim, or subtle shimmers catching the light. "Are you certain about the color?" the assistant asked, draping a cream-colored evening dress over Maribel's arm. Something bolder might stand out better at the event. Maribel thought of the media cameras and high society eyes that would roam, analyzing her from top to bottom. Every fiber of her being shrank from the idea of being the center of attention. No, subdued was safer. "Cream is good," she replied softly. Over the next couple of days, she visited a nearby beauty salon as well, using part of the funds to get her hair trimmed and styled in a simple, elegant way. An older stylist, spotting Maribel's jitters, asked gently, "Is this your first big event, dear?" When Maribel nodded, the stylist smiled, patting her shoulder. "Remember, they're just people. Wealthier maybe, but still people." Each new detail, shoes, a small clutch purse, felt like stepping onto a shaky stage. She used to iron dresses for wealthy clients and set out sparkling shoes for other women. Now those items were hers to wear. Could she bear the weight of such a shift? Meanwhile, the Lansing mansion thrummed with its own brand of excitement. The staff were briefed on the upcoming championship, which meant many of the maids and butlers would work extra shifts to host gatherings before and after each round. Cooks tested canapés and hors d'oeuvres. while florists arrived with lavish arrangements to decorate the main halls. Soft murmurs wove through the corridors. "Have you heard? Miss Aldana is going with Mr. Lansing to the championship." Some gossiped in hushed voices, convinced it was a short fling. Others whispered in envy or puzzlement. A few gave Maribel supportive smiles, particularly those who had witnessed how kindly she'd treated them and how diligently she worked. She tried to ignore them all, focusing instead on an internal mantra. Stay calm, represent yourself honestly, and everything else will fall in place. On the final day of practice before the event, Maribel found Rory out back, pressing the green. When she approached, he paused in mid-swing and offered a tight nod. "Do you have everything you need?" he asked, struggling to make his tone sound natural instead of abrupt. She nodded. "Yes, sir, I'll be ready." Neither said much else, but Maribel glimpsed the shadow of worry behind his polite facade. She saw it in how he gripped his club, the slightest tremor in his hands as he lined up a practice putt. In that moment, she had an urge to ask him if the pressure was too much, if maybe being a Lansing was a heavier burden than he let on, but the invisible wall between them still stood tall, so she simply stepped back and let him focus on the small white ball. The day of the championship dawned under a bright sun. Maribel rose extra early, smoothing her hair until it shone with a glossy finish. She slipped on the cream-colored dress and secured the delicate clasp of a simple necklace she'd borrowed from a friend. Catching sight of her reflection, she barely recognized the composed woman staring back, yet deep in her eyes, she still saw a spark of apprehension. Softly, she murmured a quick prayer for courage, or maybe it was a prayer to her father's spirit, hoping she would make him proud. Then she stepped out of her room, leaving behind her usual uniform and stepping into a new realm. She found Rory waiting by a black luxury sedan, wearing a pristine shirt and sporting sunglasses. He looked every inch the celebrity CEO the tabloids loved to photograph. Yet when his gaze landed on her, there was a momentary lift in his expression, like he was honestly glad to see her. Without comment, he opened the passenger door, and she slipped inside. During the drive, they barely spoke. The air crackled with tension, but not purely the awkwardness of two people who never had a reason to converse. It felt like a quiet readiness, the hush before a big performance. Westbridge Golf Club greeted them with a spectacle of camera flashes, forming a corridor of paparazzi along the entrance. As soon as the sedan pulled up, reporters surged. Maribel's throat tightened. She had never seen so many lens shutters or microphone booms at once. Out the window, she spotted other players stepping onto the walkway with their glamorous partners, some wearing dresses worth more than Maribel's entire life savings. She inhaled, bracing for the moment she would have to step out. The driver opened Rory's door first. Immediately, the press shouted his name, crowding close. Rory extended a hand to help Maribel out of the car. As she emerged, the barrage of flashbulbs startled her. Her chest hammered, but she gripped Rory's hand, letting it anchor her in place. A cacophony of voices rose. "Mr. Lansing, who is your companion? Is she a model? An actress? Can you both pose for a photo?" Maribel glanced up at Rory, uncertain. He leaned toward her ear and whispered, "Just follow me." She gave a small nod, and together they stepped through the throng, never letting go of each other's hands. She could almost feel the rumors swirling in the air, so many hungry gazes, devouring every detail of her attire, her expression, her posture. Yet for all the cameras and stares, there was something unexpectedly calming about Rory's grip. It wasn't romantic, but it was steady, as if he was silently saying, "I won't let them overwhelm you." She found her heartbeat slowing, focusing on each measured step rather than the frenzy around them. Inside, the clubhouse lobby was a lavish space of polished wood floors, stately chandeliers, and plush armchairs. Other players were mingling, wearing crisp golf attire or sleek designer clothes. Their partners chatted among themselves, no doubt trading tidbits about the city's biggest upcoming deals or the latest society gossip. Maribel held her breath, expecting stares or sneers, but to her mild surprise no one confronted her directly. Instead, they parted ways politely, the same superficial courtesy they would show any new guest. Meanwhile, an event coordinator hurried up to Rory with a flurry of instructions: tea times, a formal dinner schedule, sponsor obligations. Maribel stood at Rory's side, content to be invisible again if it helped quell her anxiety. She realized that out here in the open, every occupant of the room could see she wasn't from their world. But she also recognized that these people mostly cared about themselves. If she stayed quiet, they might just dismiss her. Oddly, that suited her just fine. She suspected nothing would embarrass Rory more than her accidentally drawing negative attention. As the coordinator finished relaying instructions, an older gentleman with a shock of white hair approached. His eyes flicked over Maribel with a mix of curiosity and politeness. "Rory, my boy," he boomed, "thought you'd come stag again, but you surprised everyone. Introduce me to your lady friend." Rory released a tiny sigh, then turned to Maribel, placing a light hand on her shoulder. "This is Maribel," he said simply. His tone left no room for interrogation. The older man arched an eyebrow but merely extended his hand. Maribel shook it politely, swallowing her nerves. Moments later, a small bell signaled that participants should gather near the first hole. Rory gently steered Maribel to the starting point. Though her stomach fluttered, she drew a deep breath, remembering her father's words about the quiet tension of a golf course. Don't rush the moment, absorb it. With Rory at her side, she stepped onto the manicured grass. Cameras swiveled in their direction again, capturing the heir to Lansing Corporation and the mysterious companion no one had expected. The hush fell and the first shot of the tournament soared, marking the beginning of a day that would soon unravel secrets, test loyalties, and shine a spotlight on hidden talents. Neither Rory nor Maribel guessed that a stage far grander than they had imagined had just opened beneath their feet. The first round of the Westbridge Championship began in a blaze of early sun, turning each blade of manicured grass into a jewel. Maribel stood to the side of the fairway, a polite distance from Rory, who was now absorbed in warm-up swings. Nearby, other high-profile competitors paced or chatted casually with their caddies, but the tension in their expressions revealed the truth. Every man here wanted to win. Bystanders, some wealthy patrons, others press or family, clustered behind the roped-off areas, whispering about potential favorites. Maribel's job, as she saw it, was simple: support Rory by not getting in the way. She felt the weight of curious gazes drifting her way, some for only a second, others lingering, as if trying to discern how a maid had ended up on the arm of one of Westbridge's most elite scions. When she felt those stares, she just clasped her hands in front of her, focusing on the green. If anxiety crept in, she remembered to breathe slowly, as her father once told her he did before caddying for difficult clients. Nearby, a slender brunette in a stylish sundress gave Maribel a small wave. She introduced herself as Danielle, the wife of a Swiss executive who was also competing. Maribel offered a modest smile back, relieved at the friendly gesture. Danielle remarked lightly, "I saw how you two came in yesterday. It's so hard, isn't it? All the press, all the prying questions." Maribel didn't know how to respond. She was still wary of small talk in this world. Sensing her nerves, Danielle continued, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. I was terrified my first time at a championship event with my husband. I nearly tripped on my dress in front of the photographers." She laughed gently. The warmth in her eyes reminded Maribel that kindness could exist in any stratum of society. Perhaps not everyone here was a vulture waiting for scandal. At that moment, a stirring at the tee box signaled that players were lining up. Rory's group included 3 other notable businessmen, each with their own polished reputations. The loudspeaker announced them one by one. Next up, Mr. Rory Lansing, representing Lansing Corporation. A ripple of applause traveled across the crowd. Cameras lifted, Maribel's heart gave a sudden jolt when Rory stepped forward, all composure and quiet confidence, yet she spotted the subtle tension in his clenched jaw. He addressed a caddy, an older man assigned by the club, and together they evaluated the distance to the hole, the wind direction, and the recommended club. Maribel recognized something in the caddy's posture, an almost paternal guidance, reminiscent of how her father used to stand with a golf bag slung over his shoulder, giving subtle instructions to novices. Rory exhaled, placed his ball on the tee, and adjusted his stance. A hush fell over the crowd, so complete that Maribel could hear her own pulse thrumming in her ears. The swing came swift and precise, sending the ball arcing beautifully across the blue sky, landing it neatly on the fairway. The crowd gave another polite ovation. Even so, Maribel noted the flicker of dissatisfaction in Rory's eyes. He wanted it to land closer to the hole. Perhaps he was aiming for perfection this early on. She watched the next players take their turns, each striving for that perfect drive. Then the group set off down the fairway, accompanied by caddies, officials, and a small trail of spectators. Despite the initial wave of confidence from that well-placed shot, Maribel could sense Rory's reserved tension. Each time he glanced at his competition, a faint line of worry etched between his brows. "Is he always this serious?" asked Danielle, sidling up again, her husband somewhere ahead in another grouping. Maribel gave a timid nod. "I guess so," she answered, her voice low. "He's got a lot on his shoulders." Danielle's gaze flicked to the scoreboard. "They all do. Money, reputations, some come here to seal deals with other executives. This isn't just a game for them, it's a battlefield." She paused, studying Maribel more closely. "You're different, though, and that might be a very good thing." Maribel wasn't sure what to make of that comment, but something in Danielle's tone was sincerely encouraging. Before she could question further, the crowd swept forward to watch the next shot. Rory stood with iron in hand, scanning the distance to the green. A fleeting wind gust rustled his carefully combed hair, and he tightened his grip, lips pressed. Maribel caught his eye and gave the faintest nod as if to say, "You've got this." Whether or not he noticed, she couldn't be sure, but his shoulders relaxed a fraction, and he took the swing. By midday, the sun blazed high, and the course became a simmer of polished shoes, pastel dresses, and hushed commentary. Volunteers circled with trays of chilled drinks. Maribel longed for a moment of shade or a chance to sit, but whenever she drifted near a bench, something tugged at her to remain within Rory's vicinity. He wouldn't call on her, of course, he was too proud for that, but somehow she felt that if he needed a friendly face, she should be there. The group reached the 9th hole. Rory, behind by 2 strokes, displayed a taut focus. His last shot had sliced, landing him in the rough. As he walked ahead of his caddy, frustration flickered across his features. He surveyed the ball's position. It lay in a tricky patch of grass near a tree trunk. A miscalculation could cost him precious strokes. One of the other players, a powerfully built man named Grant Harrison, stepped up to take his own shot first. He delivered a near-perfect approach shot, the crowd clapping appreciatively as the ball dropped onto the green. Grant smirked at Rory, an unspoken challenge in his eyes. Maribel caught that smirk, feeling her own stomach clench on Rory's behalf. Rory took a second, approaching his ball while the caddy tried to offer advice. But he waved the caddy off, jaw set. Maribel recognized the look, a swirl of self-imposed pressure. The hush returned. She found herself whispering, almost praying. "So you land exactly where you need to." He drew the club back and swung. It connected with a solid thwack, but the angle was off by a fraction. The ball soared well beyond the green, bouncing near a bunker. A murmur of disappointment rippled. Rory's face went blank, concealing the surge of emotion. Maribel's heart squeezed. She wanted to rush over, place a comforting hand on his shoulder. But the protocols of these events forbade such interjections. Instead, she could only watch as he forced a neutral expression and marched toward the bunker. His competition advanced with smug confidence. Through the rest of the round, Rory struggled to regain his composure. By the 18th hole, he had slipped 3 strokes behind, a deficit that left him mid-pack on the leaderboard. Hardly disastrous, but for a man used to high achievements, it might as well have been last place. The final putt he sank garnered polite applause, and as the day's round concluded, officials collected scorecards. Rory strode off, avoiding reporters. Maribel quietly trailed behind, unsure if she should speak or give him space. He led her into a private lounge reserved for players and their companions, a polished room with large windows offering a view of the course. She lingered near the door, but Rory gestured for her to sit with him on a plush sofa. For a tense moment, he simply stared at the green outside. "That was not my best," he muttered at last, voice tight. She didn't respond, sensing he was wrestling with what to say. Eventually, he sighed. "I practiced so hard, and it still wasn't enough." A heavy pause. "I know you're not here to talk golf strategy, but I don't know what else to say right now." Gingerly, Maribel placed her hand on the seat between them, not quite touching him. "In golf," she said softly, "sometimes you have a rough patch, even if your swing is perfect. My father used to say it's half skill, half staying calm." She swallowed, nervous to be advising a man who dwarfed her in wealth and power. "But you shouldn't give up. A few strokes behind? There's still a chance. The next round might be better." He turned, eyes flicking to her in surprise, and for the first time that day, a glimmer of gratitude tempered his frustration. The tension in his face eased. "He was a caddy, your father?" Rory asked, as though he'd pieced something together from her earlier mention of it. "Yes," she confirmed. "He loved the sport." Rory thought this over, then nodded. The lounge door opened and an event coordinator popped in to remind him about the upcoming evening reception, a place to mingle with other executives and sponsors. Rory inhaled sharply, another social gauntlet, but the coordinator breezed out without waiting for objections. Maribel fiddled with the hem of her dress. She was aware that soon they'd step into an even more scrutinizing environment. A lavish dinner filled with Westbridge elite, all decked out in their finest. She could almost feel her hands start to tremble. She had made it through this first day on the course, but the next hurdle loomed. Would she stand awkwardly while business titans clinked champagne flutes? Would they corner her with questions about her background or condescend with casual cruelty? Rory seemed to notice her sudden apprehension. In an uncharacteristic display of empathy, he quietly said, "If you prefer, you can stay back at the mansion tonight. No one can force you to be there." Maribel considered it, sliding back into anonymity. But that voice in her head, the memory of her father's conviction that she had every right to be in any room, nudged her forward. She exhaled, meeting Rory's gaze. "I'll go," she said, gentler than before. "I promise to accompany you." He nodded, and for a moment, both let a fragile sense of partnership settle between them. The day's competition had tested Rory's resolve and teased out a quiet bravery in Maribel. They had survived it together, in their own uneven way. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the course. Soon the fairways would empty and the clubhouse would transform into a glittering social arena. Rory stood, offering a hand to Maribel. She took it, rising from the sofa, pulse thrumming with the knowledge that they were stepping into unknown territory once again. Nightfall draped the Westbridge Golf Club in a cool glow, and lights from ornate chandeliers spilled onto the lush green outside. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere had changed entirely from daylight's competitive hush to evening's murmur of deals, laughter, and networking. In one section, a string quartet played gentle melodies, providing a classy underscoring to the conversations buzzing about upcoming business ventures and real estate acquisitions. Maribel lingered just inside the ornate entrance, overwhelmed by the scene. Men in tailored suits and women in dresses that sparkled under soft overhead lights moved through the space in a kind of choreographed ballet, greeting, mingling, and shifting from one conversation to the next. She noticed the swirl of clinking champagne glasses at every turn. Rory stood beside her, momentarily silent. His usual controlled expression betrayed a trace of nerves. Indeed, the golf tournament was only half the battle. These receptions were breeding grounds for potential business partnerships. The other players and their corporate backers would be sizing up not only Rory's golf performance but also his social poise. He had shown up with an unknown companion, and eyes would be on them. In public, he habitually guarded every word and gesture, an armor that prevented closeness, yet also protected him from reckless gossip. "Shall we?" he asked quietly. Maribel nodded, matching his step as they wove through the crowd. Almost immediately, a well-dressed couple approached. Paul Linton, a known board member in a rival corporation, and his wife Bella, who was rumored to be a successful interior designer. "Rory!" Paul greeted with a crisp handshake. "Heard you had a rough patch on the back nine today. Still, there's tomorrow." Rory's smile was polite. "Yes, plenty of golf left," he replied. His hand briefly settled on Maribel's back. "Maribel," he introduced. "Paul? Bella?" Bella offered a courteous, if slightly curious, smile. "Lovely to meet you," she said. Her gaze flickered over Maribel's simple cream dress. It wasn't condescension exactly, but Maribel could feel the weight of subtle appraisal. Maribel mustered her best polite greeting. "Nice to meet you both." While Paul and Rory slipped into a talk about corporate expansions, Bella eyed Maribel's hair, her posture, the way she clasped her purse. Maribel steeled herself for an icy remark or a barrage of sly questions. But to her relief, Bella merely said, "I adore that dress. It's refreshing to see someone choosing classic elegance rather than loud statement pieces. You wear it well." Though taken aback, Maribel felt genuine kindness behind Bella's words. "Thank you," she managed, offering a small, grateful smile. Bella then chatted about some decor projects she had in mind for a new golf resort. Light conversation, but enough to keep Maribel from feeling like an outsider. Soon others glided up, each introducing themselves to Rory, some truly intrigued by his partner, others simply following social protocol. In each case, Maribel adhered to a careful balance. Polite smiles, short answers, and letting Rory steer the bigger discussions. She listened closely as the conversation shifted from golf stats to talk of local philanthropy projects, stock prices, even rumors about who might or might not show interest in a new luxury development. Every so often, she gleaned small personal tidbits about these power players, like which ones secretly collected vintage cars or which ones donated anonymously to children's hospitals. It all felt like a code she was slowly learning to read. Despite the relatively smooth interactions, Maribel's nerves remained on high alert. She noticed how meticulously the elite chose their words, how they tested each other's boundaries. She realized that with a single slip, a naive comment or a display of ignorance, she might bring discomfort to Rory. She forced herself to stay composed, even when a few bystanders whispered, "Who is she exactly?" and darted quick, speculative glances her way. At one point, she stepped aside to let Rory finish a business-oriented chat with some European investors. She wandered to an open patio, where the night air felt soothing against her cheeks. The distant lights of the city glimmered across a wide lake, and the faint hum of the party buzzed behind her. Closing her eyes for a moment, she inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air calm the swirl in her mind. She didn't exactly fit in with these titans of industry, but no one had ridiculed her yet. Maybe that was enough, for now. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Danielle, the Swiss executive's wife she'd met earlier in the day, stepping onto the patio. "Escaping the madness?" Danielle teased, leaning on the railing. Her voice was kind, resonating with empathy. Maribel huffed a quiet laugh. "Just catching my breath," she admitted, glancing back into the glow of the party. "It's a different world than I'm used to." Danielle nodded. "It is, but as I said before, they're still just people. They have insecurities and struggles, even if they hide it behind expensive suits." She followed Maribel's gaze, noticing Rory inside, still deep in conversation. "He's an intriguing one. More reserved than most," she remarked, then turned back. "I get the sense you bring out a gentler aspect in him." A faint warmth rose to Maribel's cheeks. She didn't have a ready response. Could she really have that effect on a man who hardly let anyone in? "I'm just here to help him keep calm, I guess," she said finally. "He has a lot on his plate." "That's clear," Danielle concurred. She studied Maribel, seeming to weigh a follow-up question but decided against it. Instead, she patted Maribel's arm encouragingly. "Don't let them intimidate you," she said. "Enjoy the evening. Let Rory handle the corporate posturing." Maribel nodded appreciatively, feeling a bit more at ease. Danielle excused herself, needing to rejoin her husband, and Maribel ventured back inside the clubhouse, weaving through clusters of people until she found a quiet corner near some framed pictures of past tournament champions. Her gaze drifted over a photo of a much younger Rory, maybe 17 or 18, accepting a junior golf trophy. Even then, he wore that polished, slightly distant expression. She wondered what kind of teenager he had been, if the weight of Lansing Corporation was already crushing him by then. Next to that was a photo of an older champion beaming widely with family members around him, and Maribel felt a dull ache of loss for her father, who would have adored a place like this. "Someday," he once said, "maybe you'll walk these halls too. Maybe you'll see the sport I love from the inside." How amazed he would be to see her standing here now. "Lost in thought?" came a low voice at her shoulder. She started slightly, turning to see Rory himself, hands in his pockets, brows knitted in subdued curiosity. "Sorry," he said, noticing her surprise. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." Maribel shook her head. "No, it's fine. I was just looking at these pictures." She gestured vaguely. "Remembering my father." Rory glanced at the images. "He must have been proud of you, I imagine." The statement caught her off guard. He rarely spoke about personal matters. She hesitated, then admitted softly, "I hope so. He taught me about golf. Well, the basics, anyway. But mostly he taught me to stay humble and never dismiss someone just because they come from a different background." Rory nodded slowly. Wise lessons. A subtle shift in the music signaled the dinner portion was about to begin in the adjoining hall. Attendees were milling towards the place settings, guided by staff holding seating charts. Rory and Maribel followed, and soon they located their assigned seats at a round table near the front. There they joined Grant Harrison, the imposing competitor who'd smirked at Rory on the course, and his elegantly dressed companion, plus a couple of older sponsors. Grant wasted no time pouncing on a conversation about the day's game. "Unlucky shot at the 9th hole, Lansing," he drawled, swirling his wine. "Heard it cost you a couple strokes." Rory's jaw tensed, but he responded with an even tone. "I'm still in contention. Plenty can change tomorrow." Grant smiled in a way that suggested he enjoyed Rory's frustration. True. You know, I've seen your swing, it's good, but you might be gripping a bit tightly on the backswing." It was the kind of unsolicited advice that carried an undercurrent of condescension. Maribel quietly set her napkin in her lap, feeling protective of Rory, surprised at herself for that emotion. "He'll sort it out," she said in a calm voice. "He always does." Grant gave her a curious glance, measuring her with eyes that hinted, "Who are you to speak about his abilities?" But her tone remained polite and unwavering, and he merely shrugged. "Guess we'll see." Over the course of the meal, chatter bounced between upcoming real estate ventures, potential tech investments, and whispered predictions of who would clinch the tournament. Maribel tried her best to follow, occasionally nodding when someone spoke to her. Despite some tension, the dinner passed without open conflict. Grant made a few more digs about the competition, but Rory calmly deflected them. When dessert arrived, Rory excused himself to speak with a sponsor across the room. Maribel sipped her water, checking the time. Late already. Her thoughts strayed to the mansion, where she'd typically be finishing her chores at such an hour. Now she sat at a table with multi-millionaires, clad in her borrowed finery. How surreal life could be. After a while, the formal portion wound down and guests began drifting off, some to the bar, others to their hotel rooms or cars. Rory reappeared looking drained. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. She nodded. They made their way out into the night air, stepping down the clubhouse steps beneath flickering lights. The driver was already there, door open. Inside the car, the low hum of the engine provided a cushion of silence. Rory leaned his head back, loosening his tie. Maribel tucked her feet slightly, rubbing at the faint ache of wearing heels far longer than she was used to. Neither spoke until the car turned onto a deserted stretch of road. "Thank you," Rory said abruptly, voice subdued. Maribel tilted her head in question. "For being there, tonight. I know it must have been overwhelming, but you handled yourself with poise. I appreciate it." A hint of a smile touched Maribel's lips. "I'm just glad I didn't drop anything or say something foolish," she replied. After a beat, she added, "But, you did well yourself. You had a few tough moments today, but you carried on." Her gentle tone acknowledged both his golf struggles and the social minefield he had navigated. He looked at her, an odd mixture of relief and curiosity in his eyes. "Tomorrow's another round. Another chance, I suppose." "Another chance," echoed Maribel silently. "For both of them, maybe. Tomorrow would be new territory, where their fragile alliance, this strange companionship, would either grow or crumble. Outside, the city lights whirred by, and soon they would be back at the mansion, returning to roles that once defined a stark distance between them. But something had shifted. Unspoken understanding had taken seed. When they arrived, Rory saw Maribel to her door in the servants' hall. Though he didn't speak more than a brief goodnight, his presence there, far from the grand front entrance, felt oddly personal. She thanked him again, stepped inside, and leaned against the closed door, letting her heart slow. In the hush of that small room, she reflected on the night's swirl of encounters. Exhausting, yes, but also strangely exhilarating. Tomorrow the second round awaited, a new test for Rory's skill and for Maribel's quiet resolve. Neither was certain how it would end, only that each needed some measure of the other's calm to face it. The next morning brought a soft haze over Westbridge, with the sun struggling to break through low-hanging clouds. Maribel woke before dawn, nerves already stirring in her stomach. She moved through her usual morning routine, washing, dressing, brushing her hair, yet felt a heightened awareness of everything. It was as though the events of the day before had sharpened her senses. Outside her window, she could just make out the manicured lawns of the Lansing estate, still blanketed in early fog. By the time she arrived in the kitchen, the house was unusually quiet, with most of the staff still asleep or attending to early prep for the midday meal. Maribel poured herself a cup of coffee and stood by the broad bay window, watching as the sunrise finally pierced the cloud cover. A part of her yearned for the comfort of her old, unremarkable life, a life where she wasn't crossing any lines or risking disapproval from powerful people. But in another breath, she felt a stirring of excitement. The day's fresh start, another chance, Rory had said, held a strange promise. A gentle tap on the kitchen threshold made her turn. Rory stood there, dressed in casual sportswear, hair slightly tousled, as if he'd just thrown on clothes post-shower. His gaze drifted to the coffee machine. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, in that subdued, carefully measured tone. She blinked, momentarily thrown. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside. Silently, he filled a mug for himself and leaned against the counter. They sipped coffee together, the hush of dawn around them. For a while, neither spoke. Maribel wondered if he was replaying yesterday's shots or rehearsing the approach for the second round. Then he cleared his throat. "I'm heading out to the course earlier today. Warm up, settle my mind. You'll ride with me again?" He said it less like a command and more like an earnest request. "Yes, if that's what you'd like," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "I do." That was that. She finished her coffee, set the mug in the sink, and followed him out. When they left the mansion, the estate's driver was already waiting with the sleek sedan, but Rory shook his head. "I'll drive this morning," he said, stepping toward a smaller sports car parked off to the side. The driver looked mildly surprised but said nothing, simply handing Rory the keys. Maribel slid into the passenger seat, adjusting to the low, snug interior. Rory started the engine, and they eased through the gates onto the wide road. For several minutes, they traversed the city's outskirts in silence, the hum of the engine the only soundtrack. Buildings flashed by, giving way to the early rising bustle of Westbridge. Maribel took a breath, allowing herself to sense the tension in Rory, his knuckles tight on the wheel, the faint pinch in his brow. "How are you feeling?" she ventured. "About today's round?" His shoulders lifted in a near-silent sigh. "Better than yesterday, I think, but the pressure's still there. My board, the press, they want results, a top finish. Sponsors see me as a showpiece in many ways." He paused, as if considering whether to reveal more. "There's this need to prove I'm worthy of the Lansing name, too." She nodded, absorbing his words. "That's a lot to carry on your shoulders, especially for a game that's meant to be as much mental calm as physical skill." He cast a quick sideways glance at her, almost surprised by how accurately she'd captured the dilemma. "Yes," he said, voice low. "That's exactly it." They turned onto the tree-lined drive leading to the Westbridge Golf Club. Early morning staff milled about, preparing everything from fresh towels to practice tees. Rory parked, and the two of them walked toward the clubhouse entrance where a small crew of reporters already loitered. Spotting Rory, cameras clicked, though not as frantically as the day before. The initial spectacle had passed. Now the press wanted updates. Did Rory plan to recover from his middling performance? And who was the mysterious woman by his side? As they stepped through, an official in a neat blazer approached. "Good morning, Mr. Lansing. You're quite early," he greeted. "The practice range is yours to use. Your caddy should be arriving shortly." "Thank you," Rory said, offering a quick nod. He turned to Maribel. "You can watch from the side if you like, or explore the clubhouse if it's more comfortable." The memory of the day before flitted through her mind, the swirl of watchful eyes, the tension in the air. She would not force herself into the thick of it just yet. "I might just watch from a distance," she said softly. "Let you focus." That seemed to relieve him. He pressed his lips together in a small smile before moving off to the practice range. Maribel found a vantage point near a quiet corner of the fence, leaning against it as the morning sun gathered strength. A handful of other early bird players were also warming up, each with their own caddies. She observed Rory carefully, noticing how he inhaled before each swing, tested his grip, then launched into fluid motion. The crisp crack of the ball echoed into the still air. Sometimes the shot was beautiful, sailing straight and true. Other times it veered slightly. She watched how his shoulders tightened after a miss-hit, how he'd let out a tight breath. Even from a distance, the struggle was apparent. After a few more practice shots, Rory conferred with his caddy, nodding at suggestions. Maribel remembered the times her father had recounted how a good caddy was more than a bag-carrying helper. They were psychologists, weather forecasters, and morale boosters in one. She caught herself wondering if the caddy recognized Rory's deeper tensions, too. As the official start time approached, more spectators and participants arrived. The energy shifted from serene morning calm to a more buzzing activity. Danielle waved to Maribel in passing, mouthing a cheery, "Good luck," presumably for Rory. Maribel returned a small wave. Before long, Rory was ushered to the first tee for his second-day pairing. His group featured Grant Harrison again, and another well-regarded contender, a quiet but formidable executive named Marek Novak. The three greeted each other with businesslike nods. Grant flashed his usual smug confidence, which instantly put Maribel on guard. She wanted Rory to hold his composure, to not let that brashness get under his skin. "Players, on the tee," an official announced. The throng of watchers and cameras settled, forging a corridor of expectancy. Rory stepped forward first this time. Ball, tee, driver, each detail controlled. The crowd hushed. Maribel felt her own heart skip as he readied the swing. In a fluid arc, Rory swung and the ball soared. She followed it with her gaze. A nearly perfect shot, landing on the fairway in a prime position for his next approach. A ripple of applause spread. Relief fluttered through her. Rory half turned in her direction, not exactly smiling, but a shadow of tension lifted from his face. Grant followed with a powerful drive that ended up in comparable territory, and Marek delivered a precise shot as well. The match was on. Hole after hole, Rory played with new confidence, carefully avoiding the pitfalls that had ensnared him the day before. While not flawless, he left a putt short on the fifth green. He frequently recovered with steady approach shots, each time harnessing that calm he'd obviously tried to cultivate all morning. Maribel shadowed him from the sidelines, quietly clapping when a shot found its mark. Every stroke that placed him closer to par or below brought a touch more poise to his posture. In the gallery around her, clusters of watchers commented on the surprising shift. "He's more composed today," someone noted. "He must have fixed that backswing tension," another murmured. A sense of pride warmed Maribel's chest, as if she'd contributed in some tiny way to his newfound composure simply by believing he could do it. By the turn at hole 9, Rory had shaved off a couple of strokes from yesterday's total. Grant, meanwhile, bristled at the closeness of their scores. Marek Novak remained calmly in the mix. On the 10th tee box, Grant struck out with a slightly too aggressive swing, driving his ball into the rough. Rory stepped up, measured, swung, and found the center of the fairway. A small grin twitched at the corner of his mouth when the crowd applauded. It was a subtle expression, but Maribel felt a jolt of shared triumph for him. Around the 12th hole, clouds began gathering. A hush spread as distant thunder rumbled. Officials peered at the sky, watchful for any sign that they might need to pause. The possibility of rain made the competition more tense. Wet grass could change everything. Rory, Grant, and Marek quickened their pace slightly, determined to finish as many holes as possible before a downpour. Maribel followed, stepping around puddles forming on the cart path. The air thickened with humidity, and a breeze picked up. A few drops spattered on her dress, but the tournament continued. Rory sank a critical putt on the 15th, the ball dropping smoothly into the cup, a birdie that brought him solidly under par for the day. The small crowd around them cheered with genuine excitement. Maribel dared to exhale, relieved that the second round was going so well, but Grant refused to fade quietly. On the 16th hole, he executed a brilliant bunker shot that soared up near the pin, drawing a murmur of admiration. "Nice," Rory admitted curtly. Grant shot him a sideways smirk. The tension between them hung palpable in the charged air. By the 18th hole, the sky was fully overcast, the wind cooler. Each player faced one last chance to improve their day's tally. Marek sank his final putt with ease, earning polite applause. Then Grant holed a slightly longer putt, pumping his fist lightly at the result. It put him just a hair above Rory's total. Now it was Rory's final shot, a medium putt, maybe 12 feet out, with a subtle right-to-left break. The hush fell like a blanket, camera shutters poised. Rory crouched, eyeing the line. He rose, exhaled, and addressed the ball. In that moment, a sharper gust of wind rippled across the green. He drew back the putter and stroked. The ball rolled, curving on that slight break. Maribel found herself leaning forward, willing it in. Plunk. It dove into the hole. Cheers erupted, a wave of applause more enthusiastic than any crowd reaction he'd had the day before. Rory's face broke into a reserved but unmistakable smile. He had tied with Grant for the day, edging just one stroke behind the overall leaders, a drastic improvement from his prior round. Maribel applauded, her spirits soaring in quiet celebration. The official scoring posted on a nearby digital board. Yes, he was in serious contention now. Grant forced a congratulatory grin, though his eyes hinted frustration. He clapped Rory's shoulder. "Well done," he drawled, turning briskly away to speak with his caddy. Marek offered Rory a polite handshake. Then the group dispersed, letting Rory sign his card and check in with the tournament staff. Maribel slipped through the milling crowd to meet him, but he was promptly intercepted by reporters keen for a statement. She paused a few steps away as he answered them with measured politeness. "Adjusted my strategy, worked with my caddy, and found my rhythm," he was saying. "Glad the results reflect that." Cameras flashed. One reporter lobbed a question about his personal life. Rory deftly pivoted to neutral answers, refusing to give them fresh gossip. Eventually, the circle of reporters let him go, turning their attention to other competitors. Rory finally reached Maribel, exhaling heavily as if releasing a week's worth of tension. "That felt better," he said, voice low. She beamed. "You looked more like yourself out there." He gave a single nod, then surprised her by leaning in slightly, lowering his voice. "Couldn't have done it without a calmer mind, and I think you helped me find that." Though still formal in tone, sincerity underpinned his words. "Let's head back. I'm done parading for cameras." They walked side by side, weaving through the crowd. On the way, they passed Danielle, who flashed them both a grin and a thumbs up. They also brushed past some board members from Lansing Corporation who nodded their approval at Rory. Maribel's pulse fluttered. Clearly, people were noticing his comeback, and they seemed more accepting of her presence. It was all so new and uncertain, yet a spark of hope lit inside her. They had navigated another day in this strange, elite realm, forging a connection built on quiet, mutual support. Rory retrieved his jacket from the locker area, and soon they were heading out to the parking lot again. The sky threatened a real storm now, thunder rolling closer. A sense of hurry hung in the air as spectators scrambled for cover. Rory clicked his key fob, and the sleek sports car responded with a beep. They got in just before the rain started, droplets pelting the windshield. Rory's hands, still a bit tense, rested on the wheel. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat there, watching raindrops trace erratic paths down the glass. "That final putt," he began softly. "I swear I heard my heart pounding in my ears." Maribel swallowed. "You didn't show it." He chuckled, a quiet sound. "Well, I've had a lot of practice hiding my nerves." Then he turned his head, regarding her with that same mix of curiosity and gratitude. "You, on the other hand, make me feel less of a need to hide." She didn't know how to respond. Her cheeks warmed under his gaze, and the patter of the rain only heightened the intimacy of the moment. At last, she simply said, "I'm glad." Rory's face softened. He seemed on the cusp of saying more, maybe about the upcoming final rounds or the swirl of expectations, but a crack of thunder made them both flinch. He sighed, twisted the key, and the engine purred to life. "Let's get home before this downpour traps us here." Maribel nodded, fastening her seatbelt. As they pulled out, she watched the golf club recede in the rearview mirror, feeling a sense of cautious optimism. The transformation she had witnessed in Rory's game and in his demeanor felt like a fragile victory. Yet with 2 more rounds to play, anything could happen. The competition was fierce, and the societal pressures never slept. But she couldn't deny a renewed confidence in him, and in the delicate bond forming between them. Driving back through Westbridge's rain-soaked streets, they barely spoke, but the silence no longer felt guarded. Instead, it felt comfortable, as though they both acknowledged a shared triumph. The storm thickened, lightning flashing across the sky, yet the steady hum of the car enveloped them in a protective cocoon. Maybe, Maribel thought, this bond could endure even under the scathing glare of the elite. Maybe they were finding a way to navigate each other's worlds, stroke by patient stroke. By the time they arrived at the Lansing mansion, the rain had turned into a torrential downpour, the driveway glimmering with puddles. Rory parked close to the door and they hurried inside, clothes damp from those few seconds in the storm. A staffer offered towels, eyeing them curiously, but neither Maribel nor Rory stopped to explain. The day had been long and each retreated to their spaces for a moment's respite. Still, the air felt lighter than it had in days, carrying with it the promise of what tomorrow might hold. Overnight, the storm raged on. Thunder boomed and lightning flickered outside Maribel's small window. Though safe inside the Lansing mansion, she found herself unable to sleep soundly. Each crash of thunder rattled her nerves, but what stirred her most was an undercurrent of excitement, the echoes of Rory's success earlier that day. She had seen him reclaim a piece of himself on that course, focused, confident, more alive. She rolled over, hugging a spare pillow, a faint smile touching her lips despite the restless night. Morning arrived with the skies somewhat calmer, though remnants of the storm lingered in scattered puddles and a damp chill in the air. Maribel dressed for another day at the championship, choosing a simple knee-length skirt and a lightweight blouse, appropriate for an event that might toggle between sunshine and lingering drizzle. When she stepped into the hallway, she noticed a few staff members whispering among themselves but offering small, courteous nods to her. The entire household seemed to have sensed a shift. Miss Aldana was no longer just the silent maid. She was someone that Rory himself relied on. As she made her way downstairs, she nearly bumped into the estate manager, Mrs. Gardner, who had always exuded an efficient but distant manner toward Maribel. "Oh, good morning," Maribel said hastily, pausing on the step. "Good morning," Mrs. Gardner responded, taking a moment to look her over. "You're off with Mr. Lansing again, I presume?" Maribel nodded. The estate manager's expression softened by a fraction, though she didn't smile. "Well, you've certainly surprised us all," Mrs. Gardner said, neither praise nor scorn, but a hint of curiosity. "I do hope everything remains comfortable for you here." Yes," Maribel answered carefully. "Everything is fine." Mrs. Gardner gave a single nod, then continued on her way. Maribel exhaled. She sensed the unspoken meaning. The staff were watching, uncertain how to navigate her new role. Or perhaps they feared she might forget her old duties, let her bond with Rory go to her head. She silently vowed to remain grounded, no matter how confusing this situation became. Downstairs, she found Rory already dressed in his golf attire, reading emails on a tablet by the living room window. When he noticed her, he straightened, tucking the device away. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," she echoed. He hesitated, then motioned for her to join him. As they walked side by side toward the front door, she saw a faint tension in his stance again. She understood. 2 solid days had passed, but the tournament was far from over. This next round, often referred to as moving day in golf, would determine who had real potential to vie for the final championship. If he stumbled now, all his progress could vanish. Outside, the air was cooler, the sky a patchwork of gray clouds and fitful sunbeams. They rode once again in Rory's sports car. He seemed to prefer driving himself now, hardly exchanging words. Instead, they shared a mutual readiness for the day's tests. Upon arriving at Westbridge Golf Club, they faced the familiar swarm of spectators and journalists. Word of Rory's improved performance had spread, so more cameras waited at the entrance, hoping for a quote or a photo. One reporter called out, "Mr. Lansing, any comment on your comeback in yesterday's round?" Rory offered a small nod but made no statement, swiftly guiding Maribel through the throng. The club's interior buzzed with talk of weather forecasts, potential upsets, and speculation about who might crack under pressure. Danielle caught Maribel's elbow with a friendly squeeze as they passed, whispering, "He's got a real shot. Relax and enjoy," before flitting away to find her husband. Moments later, Rory was on the practice green refining his putts. Maribel stood at a respectful distance, recalling how she had found a vantage point yesterday to observe him without distracting. This time, however, she sensed a shift in him. Though still serious, he seemed more at ease in the environment, more open to the caddy's comments, less locked in solitary tension. Grant Harrison, never one to fade quietly, sidled up to the adjacent practice station. He gave Rory a curt nod but kept his distance. Maribel noticed Grant occasionally glance over, as if gauging Rory's mindset. Meanwhile, Marek Novak and a few other contenders were scattered around, each going through their routines with silent focus. Soon, an announcement directed players to their tees. The third-round pairings matched Rory, Grant, and a new face, a rising young executive named Tyrese Walton, who had posted impressive scores the day before. Spectators and VIPs followed in clusters, umbrellas in hand in case of more rain. On the first tee, Rory addressed the ball, his caddy beside him. He lined up meticulously, took a calming breath, and swung. The ball soared, veering slightly right but still landing safely on the fairway. Applause rippled. Maribel observed his expression. It was calm, though not complacent. Solid, she thought. Not perfect, but enough to maintain confidence. Grant pounded out a longer drive, smirking when it outdistanced Rory's, but it drifted into the rough. Tyrese Walton delivered a straight shot, albeit shorter. As the trio set off, Maribel followed, along with the small gallery. She found Danielle again, who happily accompanied her, occasionally offering quiet encouragement. Over the next several holes, Rory played consistently. Par, a rare birdie, a couple of near-miss putts. The crowd's support swelled, particularly those intrigued by the Lansing name and the gossip swirling about his personal life. This time, though, the spotlight felt less suffocating to him. If the onlookers wondered about Maribel, they kept their distance, or at least had the tact not to pry openly. On the seventh hole, Grant stirred up drama with a brilliant approach shot that rattled the pin and nearly holed out. He winked at a nearby camera, clearly reveling in showmanship. Rory watched this display impassively, acknowledging it with a polite dip of his head. Meanwhile, Tyrese quietly kept pace, sinking putts with a surgeon's precision. After a steamy climb up the leaderboard on the front nine, Rory faced an unexpected stumble at the 10th hole, a tricky dogleg where he miscalculated the wind. His drive landed in a watery hazard. A murmur of disappointment swept the crowd. Maribel felt a pang of worry, recalling how easily a small slip could snowball. She saw him clench his jaw, frustration creeping into his eyes. "It's okay," she found herself whispering under her breath. She had no illusions he could hear her, but she channeled silent support. Watching from behind the ropes, she gripped her hands together, hoping he wouldn't let that mistake define the round. His caddy helped retrieve a penalty drop, and Rory took a moment to center himself, giving up a stroke. The next shot soared onto the fairway, setting him up for an eventual bogey, an unfortunate blemish, but not a total disaster. Grant used that opening to pull ahead by a stroke, shaking the scoreboard dynamic. Tyrese stayed steady. By the 12th hole, tensions rose, the competition as fierce as ever. Maribel noticed Rory's face growing more set, as though he was fighting off the negativity of that penalty. She recalled her father's frequent refrain, "In golf, forget the last shot, focus on the next one." She silently urged Rory to do exactly that. Surprisingly, on the 13th tee, he regained composure, unleashing a stunning drive straight down the middle. Another wave of applause. Danielle clapped softly next to Maribel. "He's fighting back," she murmured, impressed. "Yes," Maribel agreed, heart pounding with relief. She found herself marveling at how invested she felt. A simple shot felt like an emotional victory, fueling her own sense of hope. Hole after hole they pressed on. Grant, Rory, and Tyrese remained locked in a seesaw battle. By the time they reached 17, the storm clouds had drifted far enough for a few beams of sunlight to pierce the gloom. Rory sank a gutsy putt for birdie, pulling himself back within striking distance of the top. The crowd roared approval. Clearly some loved the drama of a near comeback. At the 18th hole, each competitor faced a final test. Tyrese, the new talent, executed a safe par, finishing the day only one stroke off the overall lead. Grant took a risky approach but ended with a par as well, keeping himself in the top mix. Then came Rory, needing a good finish to stay in prime position for Sunday's final round. The entire crowd hushed. Even Danielle grabbed Maribel's arm in anticipation. He swung his iron, lofting the ball up toward the green. It landed, bounced once, twice, then rolled, stopping a comfortable distance from the pin. Not an easy putt, but manageable. The hush broke into murmured approval. 2 putts from there would be par, still a strong result. Rory read the subtle slope carefully. The first putt glided closer than anyone expected, leaving a short tap-in. He eased that final stroke into the cup, securing par. Smiling faintly, though not with wild exuberance, he doffed his cap to the applauding crowd, giving a quick handshake to Grant and Tyrese. They'd finished in a tight cluster on the leaderboard. With 1 round to go, the championship was anyone's game. As official scorers confirmed the day's numbers, Maribel wove through the spectators. She caught a glance at the updated standings. Rory was currently tied for 3rd overall, just 2 strokes off the lead. Considering his rough start on the 10th hole, that was a triumph. The rest of the board members in Lansing Corporation had to be thrilled. She'd glimpsed a few of them, beaming from the gallery. Rory approached, pocketing a small towel. The moment their eyes met, he exhaled a near smile, relief evident in the relaxing of his features. "That could have gone worse," he said softly, voice tinged with humor despite the tension. She beamed back. "You did well. The water hazard. It's behind you now." He nodded. "Yeah," he murmured, then caught sight of an approaching sponsor. A flicker of impatience crossed his expression. He wanted to savor the moment, but business demanded otherwise. With a quick glance at Maribel, he said, "Give me a few minutes, then we can head out." "Of course," she responded, stepping aside so he could greet the sponsor. She watched him engage in polite handshakes and accept congratulations. He wore his social armor well, but behind it, she sensed a quieter contentment. Once again, Danielle popped up at Maribel's shoulder, sipping from a water bottle. His game was resilient today, she noted appreciatively. He could really pull this off tomorrow. "I hope so," Maribel said. "But anything can happen. The competition is tough." Danielle chuckled. "True, but from what I see, he's found a calm center. Sometimes that's the difference between a champion and a runner-up." Her gaze turned thoughtful. "Is that you, perhaps, anchoring him?" Maribel flushed. "Me? No, I mean, he's doing the hard work. I'm just—" "Don't sell yourself short," Danielle interjected gently. "It's clear he trusts you in a way he trusts few others." Maribel's heart fluttered, uncertain how to respond. Trust, yes. She felt the fragile threads of connection with Rory, but was that enough to upend the barriers between their worlds? Before she could articulate any reply, Danielle offered a quick hug, then drifted off to join her husband. Rory rejoined Maribel, having navigated another cluster of well-wishers. "All done," he declared, that slight curve to his lips betraying the day's satisfaction. They walked to the parking lot as the crowd thinned, the sun's rays finally parting the clouds enough to cast a soft warmth over them. He opened the passenger door of his car, then settled into the driver's seat. They pulled out onto the road without fanfare, leaving behind a golf course that had become an arena for both skill and quiet self-discovery. In the hush of the drive, Maribel glanced at him. "You must be exhausted," she said softly, noticing the faint shadows under his eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck. I am. But it's a good exhaustion. I can't wait to tackle that final round tomorrow. If I hold it together, I could truly contend. She nodded. It's exciting and nerve-wracking. He agreed with a sigh. Then his tone shifted, quieter, more personal. After tomorrow, I'll finally be able to breathe. Regardless of the outcome, at least I can say I gave it my all. He paused, then cast her a quick glance. Thank you, by the way. I know this hasn't been normal or easy for you. She met his gaze. It's been new, certainly, she allowed. But it's not all bad. I've discovered things about myself, too. She hesitated, then added, I see how you handle pressure, and it makes me think maybe I can handle it, too. Just in my own way. He flashed a flicker of surprise, then returned his attention to the road. A small smile tugged at his lips. We're learning from each other then, he murmured, sounding almost pleased at the notion. Maribel let the comfortable silence settle. The city's skyline loomed ahead, lights beginning to blink on as dusk approached. Tomorrow's final round might be the pinnacle or the heartbreak of Rory's golf quest. She felt her pulse quicken at the thought of stepping once more into that swirling crowd, providing what moral support she could. Yet beneath it all, she was acutely aware that when the tournament ended, the real questions would remain. Where would she stand in Rory's life? Would they return to their separate spheres, CEO and maid, occupant and employee, or was there a new path forming, one that neither had fully imagined? She didn't know, but for now, she held on to the fragile optimism kindled by each step they took together, each shared sunrise, each steady glance that said, I see you, even amid a sea of wealthy faces and corporate demands. The stage was set for tomorrow, and for once in her life, she felt unafraid to be seen. Dawn broke over Westbridge with a clear sky, the stormy clouds of previous days swept clean. The morning light spilled into Maribel's modest bedroom, waking her earlier than usual. She lay still for a moment, heart thumping in quiet anticipation. This was it, the final round. If Rory held his ground, he could very well claim the championship. If nerves got the better of him, it might slip away. Rising, she slipped into a simple dress that allowed her to move comfortably. No sense wearing anything fussy if she'd be on her feet for hours. Her reflection in the small mirror showed lingering circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept well, mind buzzing with what-ifs. Would Rory muster that inner calm once more, or would the pressure of the final day crack him? Down in the grand foyer, a hush sat over the mansion. Most of the staff had not yet begun their busier tasks, though a few crossed paths with her, some offering encouraging nods, others wearing uncertain expressions. She wondered if they, too, felt invested in Mr. Lansing's performance, not just as their employer, but because the entire city's eyes were on him. Stepping outside, she breathed in the fresh morning air. The estate's gardens glistened with dew. A hint of warmth crept into the breeze, hinting at a bright sunny day. A black sedan idled at the front steps, driver at the ready. But to her surprise, Rory was nowhere in sight. Usually, he was the one waiting, or at least appearing at her side promptly. Confused, she lingered near the car, scanning the grounds. Minutes ticked by, and her concern began to grow. Could he have left without her? Had something happened? Just as she considered heading back inside, she saw him emerge from a side entrance of the mansion, tennis shoes crunching on the gravel path. He wore a simple athletic jacket, hair slightly damp from what looked like a brisk walk or jog. "Good morning," he greeted, breath a bit elevated. "I woke up feeling restless, so I took a quick stroll around the property." The corners of her mouth lifted in relief. "You all right?" He nodded, but his eyes flicked away briefly. "I needed to clear my head. Everyone wants a piece of me today. Sponsors, the press, even some of my board members are making demands. It's a lot." Then, with a slight uptick of his chin, he added, "But I'm good. just needed a few minutes of quiet before the chaos. She understood completely. Ready now? He mustered a half smile. Yes, let's go. The ride to the golf club felt weightier this time, both of them aware this was the last day. The final chance. Rory stared through the window, perhaps mentally rehearsing each swing. Maribel tried to remain calm, studying the passing buildings and lush landscaping on the route she was coming to know well. Upon arriving, the atmosphere was markedly different than previous rounds. It was Sunday, traditionally the day a champion was crowned, and the crowds were bigger, the media presence even more intense. Ribbons of color draped the clubhouse, and large digital scoreboards had been positioned around the course, ready to chart the drama hole by hole. A wave of applause rippled through the entrance as top competitors arrived. Maribel saw Grant Harrison stepping out of a limousine, flanked by a small entourage. Tyrese Walton, looking sharp in a tailored polo, was already chatting with reporters. Marek Novak arrived in quieter style, slipping past cameras with a nod. This final day was a magnet for major local celebrities and business leaders, all wanting to witness the excitement in person. Rory paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply before stepping in. Cameras flashed, reporters fired off questions. Mr. Lansing, do you feel confident about your chances? Are you prepared for a playoff scenario? Any comment on your rumored sponsor deals if you win? He answered politely, giving measured responses, then moved past them, with Maribel trailing in his wake. Inside, the locker room teemed with caddies, staffers, and a swirl of last-minute logistics. Maribel stayed outside, finding a spot in the hallway. She noticed certain VIPs being guided to special lounges, a few recognized faces from high society. Her stomach twisted, partly from excitement, partly from the old insecurity. Then Danielle appeared, beaming. "Final day," Danielle said, clasping Maribel's hands. "We'll be on the edge of our seats. Are you ready?" "As ready as I can be," Maribel admitted with a nervous laugh. "It's all up to him, though." Danielle squeezed her hands. "He's come this far. Trust that he'll find the mental calm again." A short while later, the official pairings were announced over the club's speaker system. By virtue of the standings, Rory was placed in the final grouping with Tyrese Walton and a veteran competitor who'd surged overnight, a formidable Japanese businessman named Kentaro Sato. Grant Harrison was in the penultimate group, having slipped slightly in the rankings. Maribel suspected Grant must be fuming to miss the final grouping by a stroke, though he was still very much in contention. Rory emerged, changed into his signature golf attire, a navy polo, crisp trousers, and a visor. His expression was resolute, eyes locked onto the corridor leading to the first tee. Maribel gave him a small, encouraging nod. He returned it, saying, "Wish me luck," so softly she almost didn't catch it. He headed off, and she followed along with the throngs funneling toward the opening tee box. A hush of anticipation fell as the announcer introduced each player. The camera crews angled for the best shots, sponsors craned their necks, and spectators jostled for vantage points. Maribel stood behind a roped section, flanked by Danielle and her husband, who was also caught up in the tension. Kentaro Sato teed off first with a solid, graceful swing that placed him center fairway. Applause. Next was Tyrese Walton, who launched a bomb of a drive that soared impressively far. More applause. Finally, Rory stepped up, setting his ball on the tee. A hush thicker than all the preceding day's hushes fell. He took a breath, wound up, and drove the ball. It soared, slightly left but still a respectable landing on the fairway. The gallery cheered. The group advanced, and so began the final round. Each hole felt like a small drama in itself, the scoreboard updating in real time. Rory played with careful precision. No reckless gambles, no extreme risks, but a quiet determination to avoid blow-ups. Kentaro exhibited a calm mastery, rarely missing a fairway. Tyrese, the rising star, alternated between flashes of brilliance and the occasional slip. From the corner of her eye, Maribel caught glimpses of the scoreboard. After the first few holes, the top 5 players remained tightly packed, only a stroke or two separating them. By the turn at hole 9, the tension was palpable. Rory had collected a couple of birdies, offset by a bogey. He was still in the hunt, just one stroke behind Kentaro and level with Tyrese, while Grant was making his own charge in the previous group. Danielle squeezed Maribel's arm, whispering, "He's right there, right on the edge of something great." Maribel's heart hammered. She watched Rory's posture closely, glimpsing small signs of nerves, exhaling before each swing, rotating his shoulders like he was trying to shake out tension. But so far he held steady. Memories of her father's stories returned, filling her mind with a sense of how golf was, at its core, a test of personal fortitude. Mind and body working in tandem, refusing to buckle. Around hole 11, a hush rippled across the course. Grant Harrison had posted a stellar front 9 climbing up the leaderboard. Word spread that he was only a stroke off the lead, nearing the final holes. The gallery around Rory's group thickened too, everyone wanting to see how these final contenders would respond. At hole 13, Rory sank a gutsy downhill putt for par. Maribel, Danielle, and the onlookers around them exhaled in collective relief. On hole 14, Tyrese soared with a brilliant birdie, momentarily taking the lead. Rory responded with a calm par. Kentaro had an uncharacteristic slip, missing a short putt for bogey. Suddenly, Tyrese topped the scoreboard, with Rory just behind, and Kentaro tying with Grant somewhere behind them. The final race was on. Hole 15 tested them with a narrow fairway. Tyrese misjudged the wind, hooking into the trees. Rory, cool-headed, delivered a safe if somewhat shorter drive. They pressed on, the watchers breathless. Tyrese managed only a bogey while Rory snagged par, tying them up again. Kentaro rebounded with a birdie, regaining lost ground. The scoreboard read, Tyrese, Rory, and Kentaro locked in a 3-way tie, Grant only 1 stroke behind. The tension was thick enough to taste. 16th hole, a tricky par 3 over water. Tyrese placed his shot onto the green's edge, a tough downhill putt ahead. Kentaro attacked aggressively, but the ball bounced on the fringe, precariously close to rolling off. Rory stepped onto the tee, ignoring the cameras capturing every bead of sweat. He selected an iron, conferred briefly with his caddy, and swung. The ball arced high, then plummeted toward the green, landing softly about 15 feet from the pin. A collective murmur of approval rose. He might have a realistic birdie chance. Each competitor lined up their putts. Kentaro rolled his ball near the hole, tapping in for par. Tyrese left his long putt short, also walking away with par. Then Rory took his stance. Maribel clenched her fingers in silent fervor. He made his stroke, the ball gliding across the grass, curling gently toward the hole. Would it drop? Barely. It lipped out, spinning around the cup's edge before halting inches away. A low groan from the gallery followed by applause as he tapped in for par. He'd missed a golden chance to take the outright lead, but at least he hadn't lost ground. All 3 remained tied going into the 17th. Ahead of them, news drifted that Grant Harrison had bogeyed the same hole, likely knocking him out of immediate contention. So the champion would likely be among Tyrese, Kentaro, or Rory. Maribel felt her pulse race. The crowd pressed in, more spectators flocking for these final 2 holes. On 17, Tyrese found a bunker, leading to a bogey. Kentaro nailed another par. Rory carefully guided the ball to the green, sank a safe par, and suddenly, with just 1 hole left, he and Kentaro were tied at the top, Tyrese slipping a stroke behind. The 18th hole would decide everything, or force a playoff. Either scenario crackled with tension. Maribel's heart pounded. She glimpsed a cluster of Lansing Corporation board members, their faces lined with hope. Danielle murmured, "Come on, Rory," under her breath. Maribel herself was almost trembling, though she fought to keep outward composure. At the 18th tee, Kentaro stepped up first, launching a superb drive that landed center fairway. A wave of applause. Rory followed, If he matched that shot, the duel would continue. His caddy handed him the driver. Taking a measured breath, Rory swung, striking the ball flush. It soared, landing not far from Kentaro's ball, maybe slightly further back. Applause again, but overshadowed by a hush of, "Now what?" They walked their final approach, cameras trailing. Kentaro, away first, rifled a crisp iron shot onto the green about 20 feet from the pin. The crowd gave an appreciative murmur, scattered claps. Rory placed his ball, surveyed the distance. He needed an approach that landed closer, or at least gave him a comfortable putt. He steadied himself, swung, and the ball soared, drifting slightly right. It thumped onto the green but bounced out near the fringe about 25 feet away, a tricky putt. Maribel stifled a gasp. Not a disaster, but definitely more challenging. Would it be enough? Kentaro's turn. He studied his long birdie putt. The hush was absolute. He stroked the ball, sending it rolling steadily, then watched it stop a foot short. A near miss. With a calm tap, he secured his par, leaving him at the top with an overall score that forced Rory to par just to tie. A birdie would win outright. A bogey would lose it all. Maribel felt the air freeze. Rory knelt, reading the slope. He had perhaps a 25-foot putt, part fringe, part green with a subtle break. If he sank it, he was champion. But the odds were steep. Even two putting might be tough. At the ropes, people murmured feverishly. Rory rose, exhaled, set the putter behind the ball. His posture was unwavering, eyes locked on the target. For a heartbeat, it felt like time stopped. Then, with a gentle motion, he swung the putter. The ball trickled off the fringe onto the green, hugging the break. Maribel leaned forward, hardly breathing. The crowd collectively willed it onward. Would it reach or fall short? Miraculously, it carried enough pace, rolling within inches of the cup, then kissed the edge and slid by, stopping about 2 feet beyond. A universal groan, followed by applause. Not a birdie, but he still had a chance to par and tie Kentaro. Rory composed himself, stepped up, and calmly tapped the final shot. The ball dropped in. Par. The crowd roared. He had tied for the lead. He and Kentaro Sato were now poised for a playoff to decide the champion. Tyrese ended a stroke back, and Grant trailed behind that. The scoreboard blinked with the words, "Playoff, Lansing versus Sato." Maribel's hand shook with both relief and renewed nerves. A playoff was a sudden death scenario, repeating certain holes until a winner emerged. She glimpsed Rory's face, pale, determined. Kentaro, too, looked intense yet composed. Officials bustled to set up the next steps. Spectators dashed for vantage points. Danielle threw Maribel a wide-eyed look that said, "Oh my goodness!" Rory's caddy accompanied him to the side, presumably giving a final pep talk, checking gear. Maribel, behind the ropes, inhaled the electric atmosphere. One hole might decide if he ascended to champion. One hole might dash it all. And everything, his sponsors, his corporate image, the months of practice, came down to a sudden death clash under the sunlit 18th tee. She clasped her hands, sending every quiet ounce of support she could muster. Rory turned, eyes skimming the crowd until he found her. Their gazes locked. He lifted his chin once as if to say, "I'm ready." And in her heart she whispered back, "So am I." The sudden death playoff loomed like a spotlight cutting through the din of cheers. Officials conferred, deciding they would replay the 18th hole until a winner emerged. Kentaro Sato and Rory Lansing stood side by side, waiting for the signal. Photographers jostled for position, and a hush descended as the club's announcer addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed with hole 18. First to tee, Mr. Kentaro Sato." Kentaro inclined his head at Rory, a gesture of respect. Rory returned it. Both men understood the gravity of this moment. One shot at triumph, one shot at heartbreak. Maribel, pinned at the ropes with the other onlookers, felt her breath catch as Kentaro stepped up to the tee. She couldn't see Rory's face from this angle, but she sensed his nerves. Everyone's nerves. This was the culmination of 4 days of grueling competition and an entire season of preparation. Kentaro set his ball, took a measured practice swing, then drove it with a smooth, authoritative motion. The crowd exhaled as the ball soared dead center of the fairway, rolling to a stop near the same region where he'd landed it minutes earlier. Applause. A final tap of the driver to his shoe, and he stepped away, expression calm and steady. Now it was Rory's turn. He replaced his ball on the tee, gave his caddy a small nod, and positioned himself. Maribel stared intently, heart hammering in her chest. In that hush, she heard the faint rustle of leaves overhead, someone coughing in the crowd, and the distant click of a camera. Rory drew back the driver, swung forward, and struck clean. The ball flew in a high arc, slightly right of Kentaro's line but still safe on the fairway. Applause again with a few encouraging whoops. Side by side they walked that fairway once more. Both had left themselves approach shots not too far from where they'd just been. A certain déjà vu clung to the air, as if repeating the final scene of a play. This time, though, any minor difference, wind, lie, emotion, could change everything. Kentaro played first, selecting an iron. With the same measured control, he sent his ball onto the green, but it rolled a bit further than he seemed to want, stopping about 30 feet from the pin. Decent, but not ideal. Then Rory. Approaching his ball, he paused, eyes scanning the distance. The caddy leaned in, whispering. Rory changed clubs, presumably going for a safer shot than the bold attempt he'd tried before. He swung. The ball traced a moderate arc, landing on the front edge of the green, perhaps 25 feet out again. A tricky putt, but not insurmountable. The tension spiked as both men approached the green, each absorbing the topography. Maribel felt a strain in her chest. No one was speaking. Danielle beside her was holding her breath. The scoreboard flashed the word "play off" in bold letters, a stark reminder that each shot could be the last. Kentaro lined up his birdie putt from the upper slope of the green. He crouched, studied the break carefully. Then, in near silence, he addressed the ball and tapped it. It glided across the grass, hugging the slope. A gasp broke out as it approached the hole, then slid past by mere inches. Agonized moans and applause mixed as the ball trickled a couple of feet beyond. Kentaro exhaled, betraying the first flicker of tension Maribel had seen from him all day. Then Rory's turn. This was the chance. If he sank his putt, he would claim the trophy. Maribel tasted adrenaline at the back of her throat. She willed herself not to whisper or shout, not to move in a way that might distract him. Rory knelt low, studying the green from multiple angles. He rose, took his stance, and let a breath out. The caddy stepped back, leaving Rory alone with the moment. His stroke was smooth, sending the ball rolling on a gentle curve. For one pulsing heartbeat, Maribel believed it might drop. The crowd leaned in, eyes riveted. But the ball lost speed just inches before the cup, lipping out once more, nearly a replay of that earlier heartbreak. A collective groan of sympathy erupted. Rory's jaw clenched. He tapped in for par, a simple, disappointed motion. Kentaro then stepped up, calmly burying his short par putt. With that, the hole was halved. Both made par, still tied. They would go again. A ripple of restless excitement ran through the spectators. Sunday playoffs often felt like acts in a drama, and now they'd push this hole beyond the first repetition. The official quickly reassembled both men back at the tee. The caddies hustled behind them, rummaging for fresh balls if needed. Maribel's heart thundered. She could hardly believe the tension was repeating itself. How many times could they rerun this high-stakes scenario? The second playoff attempt began just the same, with Kentaro on the tee. This time he missed the fairway by a yard or two, landing near the rough. Rory, perhaps emboldened, drove it solidly center-left, giving himself a slight advantage. The crowd, sensing a potential shift, cheered louder. They advanced to their balls. Kentaro battled a tricky lie, punching out a shot that found the green's fringe. Rory delivered a measured approach that landed 15 feet from the pin. Applause. Now the advantage was his, if he could manage the putt. Kentaro's up first from the fringe, a delicate chip. The ball hopped onto the green, rolling to 8 feet from the cup. A respectable scramble. Then Rory, eyeing a putt that could set him up for victory. He gave it a firm roll. The crowd murmured, watching it arc, but once again it came up just short of the hole, leaving him a tap-in range for par. Another round of mixed cheers and sighs. Kentaro prepared for his 8-footer. If he missed, Rory would have a wide-open chance to claim the championship. If he sank it, they'd continue. A hush. He putted. The ball rattled into the cup, another par. The tension refused to break, another tie. Maribel found her hands sweating, her breathing ragged. They marched back to the tee for a third attempt. Even Danielle, normally so composed, was gripping Maribel's shoulder. "My goodness," she whispered. "This is going to break someone's nerves eventually." That third go-around, Kentaro found the fairway again. Rory matched him. Both approached the green, placing their shots to within 20 feet. Another hush, another set of putts that both ended in 2, yet another tie. Gasps and laughter rippled among spectators, marveling that these men were locked in such a tight duel. By now, the sky had started to dim slightly, though official time remained for at least a few more holes. Rory wiped sweat from his brow. Kentaro rolled his shoulders, face still stoic. A hush across the course announced that Grant Harrison, Tyrese Walton, and the other contenders had finished their rounds, confirming that the champion would be decided solely in this back and forth. Maribel glanced at the scoreboard again. Playoff, Lansing versus Sato, tied. It felt surreal, a loop with no end. During the brief pause before a fourth attempt, the caddies delivered fresh water bottles. Rory gulped some, eyes scanning the horizon as though searching for calm. His gaze swung momentarily toward the gallery. Maribel gave the smallest nod, offering silent encouragement. "You can do this," she thought fiercely. They trooped to the tee again. This time an official suggested they might switch holes if the tie persisted further. Daylight wouldn't last forever. But for now, they stuck with 18. Kentaro, quiet as ever, took his stance. Crack. Perfect shot. Rory followed with a drive that drifted slightly left, catching the rough. A murmur of concern from the onlookers. Maribel's heart sank a bit. Could that be the slip that ends it? They found Rory's ball half buried in damp grass. The caddy offered guidance, but it was still tricky. Meanwhile, Kentaro's ball lay in prime position. A wave of worry washed over Maribel. This might be the moment Kentaro took advantage. Kentaro's approach soared onto the green, around 20 feet again. He'd been consistent with that yardage. Rory steeled himself, choking down on the club. With a firm punch, he advanced the ball, but it caught the edge of the green slope, rolling further than planned. 25 feet, maybe more. He shook his head, disappointment flickering. Still, not out of contention. They stepped onto the green for the putts. Kentaro studied his line, eyes unblinking. Then he sent it rolling. The gallery held its breath. The ball slipped just past the hole, maybe a foot away. Another near miss. Another tap-in for par. Applause. Now it was all on Rory. This time he had the longer putt. If he holed it, they'd continue. If he missed too far, an easy bogey might hand Kentaro the trophy. Maribel's pulse roared in her ears. She saw him close his eyes for a fraction of a second, as though summoning every ounce of composure. Then, with careful deliberation, he stroked the putt. The ball glided across the grass, hugging the line he'd chosen. It seemed to travel in slow motion, as if the air itself thickened around them. 15 feet, 10 feet, 8, 6. The hush was so complete, Maribel could swear she heard her own heartbeat. It was on track, approaching the cup with enough pace. The ball leaned into the break, caught the lip, and dropped. A cry of elation rose from the crowd. Rory's head bowed, shoulders sagging in relief. They had survived the rough lie, forced another tie. People cheered louder than ever before. Kentaro gave Rory a quick, respectful nod, though his face showed the faint lines of strain. How long could they keep doing this? The official stepped forward, conferring quickly with club staff. "We'll proceed to hole 10 for the next playoff hole," he announced through the megaphone, drawing startled reactions from the crowd. 18th hole had proven too evenly matched. Time to change the battlefield. Staff hurried to reposition cameras and direct the mass of spectators across the course. Maribel followed the exodus, pulse still racing. Danielle, pushing through the crowd, exclaimed, "This is incredible!" At Maribel's side, she added softly, "He's holding on, blow for blow, but it can't go on forever." A short walk later, the throng converged at the 10th tee box, a dogleg hole with trees and a water hazard, one that had nearly undone Rory during his earlier rounds. She remembered the pit in her stomach when he'd gone into the water on that second day. Would it come back to haunt him now, or had he found a way to conquer it? Kentaro teed off first again. His drive was precise, curving along the dogleg. Applause. Rory stepped up, steeling himself against the water hazard's memory. With careful aim, he swung, placing his shot near the fairway's bend, safe from the lake but a bit shorter than Kentaro's. A new wave of applause. So far, so good. They marched forward, hearts pounding. Cameras flashed, the hush more potent than any Sunday hush before. The final stage was set on a hole that had tested Rory's resilience. Maribel closed her eyes for a second, praying silently that he wouldn't let past mistakes sabotage him now. Kentaro took his approach shot, hooking it slightly around the dogleg. The ball soared, landing just short of the green's edge. Next, Rory. He sized up the distance, the trees, the potential swirl of wind. With an iron, he executed a controlled shot, but it ended up drifting right, settling near a bunker's lip. A collective gasp. He'd avoided the water, but the bunker threatened to cost him a stroke or more. Maribel inhaled sharply. The tension soared as they approached. Kentaro's ball sat on the fringe, an easy pitch to the pin. Rory's was partially buried in the bunker's damp sand. She saw him pinch his eyes closed for a moment, as if remembering his father's words, only she knew he'd never had a father to guide him as hers had, but maybe he'd found his own voice. A new calm gleaned from these days of reflection. Kentaro chipped, leaving himself a mid-range putt for par. Then Rory tackled the bunker, a precarious stance, half kneeling in the sand. The entire crowd fell silent. He swung, sending the ball spraying out. It soared on a higher arc than expected, bounced once on the fringe, then rolled onto the green, closer to the pin than anyone thought possible. People erupted in cheers. Maribel almost gasped, hands flying to her mouth. He'd not only escaped a hazard, but set up a decent chance to save par. They walked to the green side by side in final confrontation. Kentaro eyed his putt, took a measured stroke. The ball broke too sharply, leaving him 2 feet left to par out. Next was Rory's turn for a birdie attempt. If he holed it, he could seal the championship right there. The hush was absolute. The ball was maybe 15 feet out, on a mild incline. He crouched, studied, stood, exhaled. Maribel felt time slow again as he putted. The ball glided, curving gently. Her heart soared for a moment. Was this the break that sank it? In a breath, it brushed past the cup's edge, settling inches away. The spectators groaned, half laughing at the drama. Another near miss, another par in the making. Kentaro calmly tapped in for par. Rory tapped in as well. Tie again. The crowd erupted in a half-lamenting, half-excited uproar. The official signaled they'd proceed to hole 11. Maribel's knees felt shaky, adrenaline surging without release. She caught a glimpse of Rory's face, sweat glistening at his temples. but his eyes remained fiercely determined, as though he would go infinite rounds if that's what it took. "Unbelievable," Danielle muttered, pressing a hand to her chest. "They're equally matched. This might be the longest sudden death playoff in tournament history." Maribel swallowed hard, stepping aside to let the throng pass. Her gaze found Rory as he retreated with his caddy to gather composure. She whispered under her breath, "You can do it. Just keep believing." Because at this point, skill was a given. The real battle was mental and emotional, a test of who would break first. The final day had turned into a marathon of wills, and with each hole they repeated, she sensed the tension ratcheting higher. The fate of the trophy, and perhaps a piece of Rory's future, hung on a razor's edge. And though she stood in a crowd of hundreds, she felt intimately tethered to his journey, hoping that between each hurried breath he remembered he wasn't alone, that somewhere behind the ropes she believed in him completely. Officials bustled about, directing the crowd to the 11th hole. Players and caddies toweled their faces, gulping water in an attempt to stay composed. Despite the late hour of the afternoon, the sun still beat down with surprising intensity. Yet the true heat came from this unending standoff. Maribel wiped a thin layer of sweat from her brow as she followed the current of spectators. Every footstep felt charged with electricity. Rory and Kentaro reached the tee. The 11th hole was a tricky par 4 with a narrow landing zone and a severe dogleg. Towering pines flanked the fairway, and a wide bunker stretched ominously near the green. As the small circle around them quieted, Rory removed his visor, running a hand through damp hair, breathing slowly. Kentaro stood a few yards away, stoic as ever, but the set of his jaw revealed he was feeling it too. An official stepped forward. "We'll continue the sudden death playoff here, starting with Mr. Sato," he announced, a faint tremor in his voice from the drama of the moment. Kentaro nodded and approached the ball. The hush returned, thick and watchful. He swung, crisp and controlled. The ball soared up the fairway, hugging the left side dangerously close to the tree line, but it stayed safe, rolling a bit short of the dogleg's bend. Applause rippled. Rory stepped up, glancing briefly at the caddy. The man murmured something about the shape of the shot, possibly advising a small fade to keep it centered. Rory exhaled, planting his feet. Maribel tensed behind the ropes, heart fluttering. After 4 draining playoff attempts, could he still muster the focus for a perfect drive? He swung. The ball sailed with a slight fade, settling neatly in the fairway's center, maybe even outdistancing Kentaro's by a few yards. A round of cheers followed, energizing the watchers. Rory gave a curt nod, not letting triumph show. He still needed to handle the approach, and Kentaro's skill was unrelenting. Moving up the fairway, the players separated to find their respective spots. Maribel trailed with the crowd, Danielle at her side, her husband close behind, all exchanging anxious glances. In the distance, someone commented that this was one of the most extraordinary playoffs in recent memory. Another fan rattled off stats about prolonged sudden death matches. Maribel tuned them out, focusing instead on Rory's form and the quiet resolve in his face. Kentaro addressed his ball first, about 180 yards to the green. He chose a mid-iron, carefully factoring in the dogleg's angle. His swing produced a low, piercing shot that cleared the bend, landing near the fringe. A playable approach, though not a guaranteed par. The crowd clapped. Rory's ball lay slightly further up, offering a potentially better angle. He studied the terrain with his caddy, likely debating whether to aim for the green or lay up. A narrower gap of pines threatened if he tried too aggressive a shot. The tension in the air mounted. Then he selected an iron. Maribel saw him take one extra breath, like a silent pep talk. He swung. The strike was pure, the ball soaring in a high arc. It cleared the pines with feet to spare, dropping onto the green with a soft bounce. A wave of excitement shuddered through the gallery. Rory's ball ended maybe 20 feet from the pin, an outside birdie chance. Good. Very good. He pressed his lips together. relief mixing with determination. Kentaro walked up to the fringe, needing a delicate chip to get close. He sank into a crouch, analyzing the grain of the grass. The hush was absolute as he chipped the ball, sending it rolling a tad too quickly. It ended 7 feet beyond the cup. Not a disaster, but no tap-in either. Now Rory's turn. If he could sink this putt, he'd card a birdie and force Kentaro to produce a near miracle just to stay alive. He crouched, scanning the break meticulously. Maribel's heartbeat hammered. She recalled each missed near finish on 18 and 10, the putts that grazed heartbreakingly close. Could this be the moment he conquered those margins? He rose, set the putter behind the ball, and stroked it with gentle precision. It rolled, tracing a slow, graceful arc. 10 feet, 8, 6. The line looked promising. Murmurs of excitement rippled. Then, heartbreakingly, the ball brushed the cup's lip and slid just off. Again. Another collective groan echoed. This time, the ball stopped only a foot away, an easy par. But no decisive birdie. Rory's shoulders sagged a fraction, yet he kept his composure. He tapped in for par and stepped aside. Kentaro now faced his own putt for par, 7 feet with a slight break. If he missed, the playoff ended here. He took his time reading it, then sent the ball rolling. It veered slightly right, then curled in, rattling into the cup. Another tie. Another chorus of admiration and exasperation from the gallery. Maribel felt almost dizzy with the repeated tension. Danielle pressed her hand to her chest, exhaling, "Unbelievable." The official conferred with staff, deciding the next hole would be the 12th. The crowd collectively groaned at the trek, but followed, unwilling to miss a second of this epic showdown. As they moved to hole 12, another par 4 with water down the right side, Maribel noticed Rory and Kentaro exchanging a look of mutual respect. Two skilled players, each refusing to yield. The caddies kept a short distance, letting them breathe. In many ways, it was no longer about corporate prestige or even the lavish trophy. It was a pure test of golf, of perseverance, of nerve. At the 12th tee, the tension spiked even higher. The sun had begun its late afternoon descent, painting the sky in streaks of gold. Rory's caddy discreetly checked his watch. Daylight was finite. They had only so long before the course fell into shadow. Kentaro teed off first. This time, he hammered a powerful drive that soared a bit right, flirting with the water hazard. Spectators gasped, some leaning to see if it would hold the fairway. The ball landed precariously close to the edge, but evidently in bounds. Rory grimaced. This might be an opening if he kept his shot safely left. He steadied himself, swung, and the ball cut a near-perfect path up the center left. A roar of applause. They advanced, finding Kentaro's ball indeed inches from the water, perched on a slope. A tough lie. Rory's ball lay comfortably on the fairway, a huge advantage. Kentaro and his caddy spoke in low tones, looking for a safe approach. A hush. The day's repeated drama weighed on them. Even a small miscue now could be fatal. He took an iron and attempted to punch the ball out, but the contact was heavy, chunking mud. The ball shot forward, clearing the water but rolling into thick rough near the green. The crowd buzzed. Kentaro was in trouble. Rory stood over his own ball, a solid 170 yards from the pin. If he found the green, he'd almost certainly secure an easier par than his competitor. The hush turned reverent. He inhaled, locked his focus, and swung. The ball soared, elegantly cutting the sky, then dropped near the green center. Maribel's breath caught. Another safe landing, about 25 feet from the hole. Applause thundered. He would have a putt for birdie, or at worst an easy par. It seemed a prime chance to end the duel. Yet, as if refusing to succumb, Kentaro advanced to his rough-bound ball, analyzing a tough chip with minimal green to work with. He gave it a deft strike, the ball popping out and rolling to about 10 feet away from the pin. Another scramble for survival, but not an impossible par. They were on the green now. Rory measured his birdie putt, carefully calibrating the slope. If he sank it, he could slam the door once and for all. He crouched, took an extra moment of stillness, and made his stroke. The ball glided across the short grass, curving just a tad. The crowd exhaled, leaning forward as one. Once again, heartbreak stung. The ball skirted the hole's rim and ended maybe 2 feet out. A wave of exasperated yet admiring voices rose. So close. Maribel, pressing a palm to her chest, felt conflicting surges of pride and tension. He'd done everything right, except for that final half-inch of luck. He tapped in for par. Now Kentaro faced a 10-footer to match that par. Miss, and it was over. Kentaro set the putter behind the ball, his expression betraying the slightest trace of fatigue. He struck it clean. The ball rolled on a perfectly straight line and dropped in with a soft clunk. Applause, cheers, a few gasps of disbelief, another tie, another hole to be played. Maribel found herself nearly wanting to scream in both amazement and frustration. The crowd erupted in half-laughing mania. People shouted encouragement. "You two are unstoppable! A legend in the making!" The official, looking borderline dazed, gestured for them to move to hole 13. Rory's caddy gave him a worried glance. How many holes could they run? Maribel followed the exodus once more, Danielle breathless beside her. "This is insane," Danielle whispered, voice trembling with excitement. "They're so evenly matched, it's like no one can break the stalemate." Maribel nodded, tears nearly brimming. She saw Rory's posture rigid with exhaustion, sweat rolling down his temple, but a fire still burned in his eyes. He was not giving up. His entire body language said, "I'll keep going until we can't see the ball anymore." They reached the 13th tee, a par 5 with multiple hazards. If any hole demanded strategic bravery, it was this one. Carts carrying officials and medics moved in the background, aware that daylight was wearing on. If they didn't find a winner soon, the match might carry into Monday, a rare scenario but not unheard of. Before the next shot, Rory paused, turning toward the crowd. Briefly, his gaze found Maribel. Even across the distance, she felt the connection. He gave her a single, small nod, more personal than he'd ever shown in front of others. She felt something tighten in her throat, a mixture of pride and longing. He was pushing to his limits, and she silently urged him to keep faith, to remember the calm that had guided him this far. Kentaro stepped up to tee off, setting the ball. The hush returned, a stage for the continuing epic. Maribel closed her eyes a moment, centering her own swirling emotions. She thought of her father, of his words about how golf mirrored life. You might do everything right, yet victory might still hinge on the smallest margin. The only thing you control is your own resolve. When she looked up again, Kentaro swung, striking a shot that soared down the fairway with beautiful grace. Applause peppered the moment. Then it was Rory's turn. Yet another test of fortitude, skill, and spirit. He inhaled, set his stance, and swung. The ball launched into the golden light of the waning sun. The crowd let out a collective gasp as it cut through the air. Nobody knew how many more times they'd do this dance, how many more heartbreakingly close putts or bunker escapes it would take. But in that breathless hush, as the ball traced a bright arc against the sky, Maribel felt a fierce conviction. He'd fight as long as it took, and she'd stand right here, praying for each shot to carry him closer to that elusive destiny he'd been chasing, on the green, and perhaps beyond. The long rays of the setting sun bathed the 13th fairway in a golden haze. Spectators, officials, and television crews crowded around, entranced by the continued standoff between Rory Lansing and Kentaro Sato. Every hole replayed was another surge of adrenaline, another reminder that fate hinged on the tiniest margins. Now they stood on a par 5 that curved left, shadowed by tall pines and flanked by a winding creek that threatened anyone who strayed too far. Rory's drive had soared in a graceful arc, and now, as he and Kentaro walked forward, the hush that followed them was palpable. The crowd formed a sea of faces on both sides of the ropes, electricity crackling with each step. Maribel kept pace from behind, Danielle at her side, clinging to hope and the last of the day's light. Up ahead, Kentaro's ball lay near the center of the fairway. Rory's had also found good footing, just a few yards past. The tension weighed heavily. Both men were drenched in sweat and concentration. A few camera operators whispered how the sun would soon dip behind the horizon. If this hole didn't decide the champion, they might need to halt until morning. Kentaro conferred briefly with his caddy, glancing at the creek that meandered near the green's approach. The caddy pointed to a layup zone short of the hazard. Kentaro nodded, stepping up to his ball and selecting a mid-iron. His swing was crisp, sending the ball safely forward, short of the creek's bend. The crowd clapped softly, aware he'd chosen caution. Rory stepped into the fairway, scanning the distance to the creek. The caddy murmured options: a safe layup or a bold shot that could carry the hazard and potentially reach near the green. The difference between safety and risk. For a moment, he closed his eyes, remembering the day he had found that calm center. To truly win might require stepping out of fear's shadow. He inhaled, nodded at his caddy, and selected a fairway wood. A soft ripple of excitement ran through the watchers, as if they sensed he was about to gamble. Setting the ball, he widened his stance, took one deep breath, and swung with a fluid power that cracked across the quiet air. The ball soared in a low, penetrating flight. It cleared the creek by mere yards, bounced on the slope, and rolled up to the front edge of the green. A collective roar burst forth, echoing among the pines. Maribel's chest flooded with relief and excitement. He was poised just short of the green in 2 shots, a rare eagle chance on a sudden death hole. Kentaro, facing an uphill battle now, advanced to his ball near the creek. He pitched onto the fairway bend, but his shot lacked the distance to reach the green. Another wave of applause followed, respectful but subdued. The advantage was clearly Rory's. Yet Kentaro had shown resilience time and again. No one wrote him off. They trekked toward the green. Rory's ball sat maybe 10 yards shy of the putting surface, perched in short grass. The pin was placed at a tricky angle on the green's upper tier. Meanwhile, Kentaro set up for a wedge from perhaps 100 yards out. He swung with unerring precision, lofting the ball high. It landed near the pin, caught a slope, and trickled 4 feet away. A brilliant approach. The crowd marveled, for the man refused to surrender. Still, Rory had the upper hand. If he chipped onto the green and sank an eagle putt, the trophy was his. Maribel's heart pounded as she watched him address the ball. She recalled how many near misses he'd endured, how each heartbreak had forced him to quell disappointment. Summoning composure, he struck a delicate chip. It popped up, landed softly, then rolled to within 8 feet. Not a gimme, but a real eagle chance. The hush reigned once more. 2 shots remained. If Rory made his putt, the match ended instantly. If he missed, Kentaro might sink his 4-footer for birdie and they'd continue. A pair of exhausted champions, each clinging to the dream. Kentaro's turn came first, further from the hole or not. Some tournaments adopt away first. But the official signaled that since Rory was lying 2 and Kentaro 3, Rory should consider the eagle putt first. He took an extra moment, verifying the order. Then, kneeling behind his ball, he examined the slope carefully. Maribel sucked in a trembling breath, eyes locked on his every move. The entire gallery had fallen utterly silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. Rory stood, set the putter, and paused. Daylight was in its final stage of golden glow, the shadows stretching. He drew back the putter head, then glided it forward. The ball rolled out, crossing the gentle break. It maintained a sure path, drifting only slightly right. As it approached the cup, cheers began to swell, only to catch in every throat. It skidded past the left edge by an inch. Another heartbreak. The crowd groaned, half in disbelief, half in admiration for the nerve required to keep trying. Rory's face tightened, but he tapped in calmly for birdie. A fantastic score on any normal day, yet no guarantee of victory. Kentaro now faced a 4-foot birdie putt. If he sank it, they'd continue. If he missed, it was all over. He crouched, took a single slow exhale and tapped the putt. The ball traced a line, straight but with a hair's breadth break at the cup's lip. Time seemed to bend as it drifted closer, closer, and lipped out. The ball spun around the rim, then hopped off, rolling an extra foot away. The gallery reacted in a frenzy, gasps, shouts, exclamations. Kentaro's composure cracked for the first time. He flinched, staring in disbelief. This was a bogey in the making, meaning he'd finish one stroke worse than Rory's birdie. The hush burst into a roar of reaction, and the scoreboard blinked. Rory Lansing, champion! Everything happened at once. The official's voice boomed over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lansing has won the playoff! Applause thundered. Cameras flashed in an onslaught of light. Maribel felt tears sting her eyes, a swirl of joy and relief. She watched Rory stand there stunned, as though still processing that the marathon had ended. Then he sank to his knees for half a second, overwhelmed by the weight of victory. Kentaro recovered, stepping forward, offering a gracious handshake. They exchanged quiet words of respect, drowned out by the cheers. Spectators surged, capturing photos, shouting congratulations. Rory's caddy clapped him on the shoulder, beaming. Officials hurried forward with a microphone, the shining trophy in a velvet case, a camera crew filming for broadcast. Maribel, pinned in the throng, saw flashes of corporate board members, sponsors, the press. She hardly noticed Danielle pulling her into a hug, squealing, "He did it, Maribel! He actually did it!" She returned the hug, tears brimming, grateful and overwhelmed. Her gaze found Rory as an official placed the trophy in his hands. He blinked, gave a small, almost shy smile, lifting it overhead for the crowd. The applause crested in a massive wave, and at last he let out a real grin. "Rory, how does it feel?" a reporter shouted, pushing a microphone forward. Another asked about future deals. Another demanded comments on his performance, and the swirl of media descended. Rory tried to respond politely, adrenaline still surging. "It's incredible," he managed. "Kentaro Sato was an amazing opponent. I never thought we'd keep going hole after hole. I'm just thankful." Maribel watched from a few steps back, feeling no jealousy for that media storm. She was content to see him triumph. Her father's words thrummed in her heart. Sometimes a single shot can change everything. That final putt had forced the pressure on Kentaro, and fate twisted in Rory's favor at last. Eventually, a Lansing Corporation board member guided him from the chaotic crowd, ushering him toward the ceremony podium inside the clubhouse. People parted like the Red Sea. Maribel hovered at the edges, uncertain if she belonged in the spotlight. Rory shot her a searching look and beckoned subtly with his eyes. The message was clear. "Come with me." She wound through the throng, reaching him just as an official announced a brief trophy presentation. Rory set the silver cup on a small stand, accepting a round of applause, camera shutters incessant. Then a hush, as though they expected some final words. He cleared his throat, still catching his breath. I want to thank everyone who supported me," he began, voice resonating over the hush. "My caddy, the tournament staff, my fellow competitors, especially Kentaro." He gestured at the quietly dignified man nearby. "This was a day I'll never forget." His voice caught, and he darted a quick glance sideways, toward Maribel. The crowd followed his gaze, curious. Some recognized her now, gossip swirling that she was the mysterious companion. Rory swallowed, then, surprising everyone, he gently extended his hand to her. She blinked, stepping closer, conscious of hundreds of eyes. He slid an arm around her shoulders in a subtle but unmistakable gesture of connection. "And I have to thank Maribel," he said quietly into the microphone. She believed in me when I was ready to doubt myself. She reminded me that composure is as valuable as any talent. I don't think I'd be standing here now without that support." A soft, startled ripple passed through the gathered onlookers, followed by approving applause. Maribel felt heat flood her cheeks, but a surge of gratitude and pride enveloped her. She glanced up at Rory, found him smiling, truly smiling. Applause grew, and the cameras captured every moment. In that instant, the social barriers she'd feared so long seemed to fade, replaced by the raw truth that their bond, however unexpected, was real. Before the media could swarm, officials began leading them toward a private reception area. Danielle rushed up, hugging Maribel in celebration. Board members clapped Rory on the back. He accepted their congratulations politely but clung to Maribel's hand, a clear signal that she was no momentary distraction. When they reached a quieter corner of the clubhouse, he finally exhaled. The trophy gleamed in his arms, overshadowing the swirl of commentary outside. Maribel and Rory stood face to face, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "You really did it," she whispered. He nodded, placing the trophy gently on a side table. Then he took both her hands, the rest of the world momentarily distant. "I owe a part of this to you," he said in a tone that carried honest gratitude. "You helped me see past fear." Maribel's throat tightened with emotion. "I just stood by, reminding you that you had everything you needed in you." He leaned closer, voice warm. "And that meant more than you know." For a fleeting instant it seemed he might draw her into a deeper embrace, but the footsteps of board members and cameras lurked behind. Instead, he squeezed her hands gently. "We'll talk more, away from all this." She smiled, the future opening before them like a brand new green. Outside, the final remnants of daylight slipped beyond the horizon. The tournament had its champion, and the watchers had their story of an epic playoff. But for Rory and Maribel, a different tale had just begun, one of stepping beyond old boundaries, forging a connection stronger than the unrelenting pressures of status and expectation. Together they stepped back into the swirling throng. Cameras flashed, and the city's elite pressed forward to meet the champion. Yet through the cacophony, Rory kept Maribel at his side, a quiet promise in his eyes that this day's victory was only the beginning of something far greater than a golf trophy. The crowd cheered them on, oblivious to the deeper bond growing in that shared silence. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.